This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
You said something interesting, and this is running off of that during our 12 Days of Christmas thing. We have a case for today, but I wanted to talk about a different thing. I got this article, and the article is from Jax Miller, and I don't know if you know who that is, but that's the author who wrote the book on Gloria Bible and Ashley Freeman, out the two girls that went missing during the fire.
Right, yeah, I know who they are.
So she wrote this for Oxygen's True Crime website, and you made a comment about it as it went by, and that was that people who were headline sifters. How did you say it?
Oh, is that case?
No, it's not that case. It's a different case. She just wrote about it.
Yeah, I said that it's unfortunate that the headline skimmers will think that the genetic genealogy part was overturned.
Yeah, and that comes from we've learned that
the headline is First Man Convicted of Murder on Genetic Genealogy Evidence Has Verdict Overturned. That's the headline.
Right. And this is in reference to William Earl Talbot, the second's case.
Correct. And the way that the headline reads, actually, I know it was just sort of in passing, but my heart sank because I was like, oh no, right? Because I've been so excited about all this new science coming forward and solving all these cases. And the way that headline reads, it makes it seem, at least in my opinion, that the genetic genealogy evidence had something to do with the verdict being overturned. Does it not?
Yeah, no, it reads like that to grab your attention, but it turns out that has nothing to do with what's happening.
No, the reason that it was overturned is because a juror during the initial questioning, as they were picking the jurors, she had, well, I believe it's a she, the jurors said that they might be partial and that they had some experiences that perhaps would lead them to not being able to be completely objective in this case in finding, a verdict against or for the defendant. And so basically it was jury bias. The Court of Appeals, the Washington State Appeals Court, they overturned both first-degree murder convictions based on the fact that there was enough evidence in the record that a particular juror who ended up being a deliberating juror, meaning that they were one of the final jurors that decided the verdict, they should have been dismissed based on whatever was in the record and the questions that they had. That's always such an interesting thing to me because
dilemma.
Well, I mean, it just seems odd. Now, I looked at what you sent me and I really did sort of glean from it that wow, now people are going to think that it's, genetic genealogy is not what it really is because you've got this first case being overturned, but it had nothing to do with the genetic genealogy evidence. And I'm actually not entirely certain that the evidence wasn't stipulated to begin with in that case. So that's interesting. That's something I would have to look into. But I believe at first they were very concerned how the evidence would be received because of the way that it came to light, right?
Right.
But it ended up being not a big deal. And they basically stipulated to the fact that the evidence was his and that the evidence was found close to, I believe it was the female victim. But I think they argued it could have gotten there a different way or something like that. Anyway, so why didn't they remove the juror to begin with? And I don't know what other people's experiences are. It doesn't seem like it's something a lot of people talk about, but it seems like the jury phase, like picking the jurors and deciding who's going to sit for the jury, not a whole lot goes into it. Well, from what I've seen.
So this is what Jack says. I'll just read a little bit of it out, just so people understand what case it was and sort of some of what you're talking about. The subtitle, so the title of the article from December 8th, 2021 is First Man Convicted of Murder on Genetic Genealogy Evidence Has Verdict Overturned. And the subtitle is a little bit about the case. William Earl Talbot II was convicted of brutally murdering a Canadian couple in 1987 in a case that marked a pivotal point in the use of genetic genealogy to solve cold cases. His conviction was overturned on appeal because of jury bias. Article goes on to say that William Earl Talbot II was convicted of killing 20-year-old Jay Cook and 18-year-old Tanya Van Kylenberg in 1987 while the Canadian high school sweethearts visited Seattle. This was previously reported that Talbot was arrested in 2018. His arrest helped set the bar for genetic genealogy, a science that has since boomed and redefined criminal investigations around the world. And that references to a 60 Minutes report. On Monday, a Washington state appeals court overturned both of Talbot's first-degree murder convictions on the grounds of juror bias. At the start of jury selection for the original trial, a juror was picked for further questioning when she expressed she might be partial to the evidence potentially presented at trial. The woman who was not named cited past traumatic experiences and her role as a new mother for reasons that she felt she could not be objective. The defendant's motion to remove the juror from the panel was initially denied. In his latest appeal, Talbot argued that his constitutional right to an impartial jury was violated, and the Court of Appeals has currently ruled in his favor. After the jurors' clear, repeated expressions of actual bias as to the precise nature of the allegations at the heart of this trial and the evidence which would be introduced, we cannot conclude that juror number 40 was sufficiently rehabilitated such that Talbot was provided a fair and impartial jury. The court's ruling included transcripts from portions of voir dire, which is jury selection, where the juror referenced growing up in a violent household. I don't know how I would feel being shown evidence of something that could bring up memories that I have worked hard to get rid of, said the juror. I also have a daughter, and I think that might also play a part in how I might feel if there was some action taken towards a young woman. I might take that personally and not be able to be impartial. Jurors heard the violent and gruesome details behind the murders for which Talbot was accused. According to court records, the victims left Victoria, British Columbia on November 18, 1987 to retrieve furnace parts in Seattle for Cook's father. Now, this is Jay Cook and Tanya Van Kylenberg, but I'm going to call them Jay and Tanya. On November 24th, Tanya's body was discovered on a steep embankment in a rural area of Skagit County. Her pants were removed, her bra was pulled above her breast, and someone had beaten her and shot her in the back of the head at close range. The following day, the couple's van was found with blood evidence, and Tanya's missing pants were inside. On November 26, 1987, so a little more than a week later, Jay's partially covered body was found in a rural area in Snohomish County. He had sustained blunt force trauma to the head and was strangled to death with a dog collar and twine. The killer also shoved a pack of cigarettes down his throat. Investigators collected DNA from the van and from Tanya's body. In 2018, investigators tested the DNA using genetic genealogy, an up-and-coming science at the time that was still relatively new. And this is the testing that was made famous with the ultimate capture of Golden State Killer Joseph DeAngelo that same year. It helped law enforcement create suspect profiles through familial DNA links developed using genetic genealogy databases. Talbot was then identified as a possible source. Investigators talked to him and collected a coffee cup he had discarded. Ultimately, that tied him to the murders. Talbot was a construction worker and a truck driver who lived near where Jay Cook's body was found. He was arrested at a job site in May 2018, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Monday's decision to overturn the murder convictions came as a shock to the prosecutors, according to KOMO News. We're disappointed as an office, to say the least, and I'm sure the family is similarly disappointed, said Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney Adam Cornell. The fact that the trial court did not dismiss that juror for cause impacted Mr. Talbot's right to a fair trial, and here we are. Cornell said he plans to appeal to the state Supreme Court before a January 5th, 2022 deadline, according to the Seattle-based news outlet. Failing that, his office will retry Talbot. And Jax ends the article with, "This isn't over yet. We're going to fight for justice for these families." So that's sort of describing how they got there. Ultimately, the defense tried to get rid of the juror and could not.
Right. And so I don't feel like this is going to make a difference in the ending of the case.
No.
And so, I mean, while it is a complete waste, I guess they should overturn it. They really should have excused the juror to begin with. I find it hard to believe that someone who felt that they couldn't be impartial because they themselves might, it appears that she was a victim of something as well. That's how it sort of come off to me. And, you don't really see somebody that's been victimized and doesn't feel like they can be impartial on a jury, like bullying everybody into finding the guy guilty, right? I mean, they just sit there quietly and go along with what's happening.
Right.
That's my opinion. But, they really should have went ahead and dismissed her. And it's weird that the court didn't. That's really weird. But like I said, very little goes into jury selection. And it's one of the things that, like, this type of thing should never happen, because the court should, like, actively be considering all of this as they're going into murder trials, right? I mean, this was a crime that happened in 1987, and it was already, let's see, he was arrested in 2018. I'm not sure when the trial was.
It would have been after that, so you're talking at least 30 years have passed. 32
right,
years.
And all that time. And so, what's one more juror dismissal and to get another juror on, right?
Yeah, and depending on where you are, the local rules for what types of challenges you get, they can vary. So the defense may have run out of challenges at this point, or this may have been one they felt like the juror could be rehabilitated for some reason or another. But it turns out that the appeals court currently doesn't agree with them, and the Supreme Court may overturn that. Ultimately, I don't think they will.
For that would be?
They could overturn it from the perspective that it doesn't change the outcome of the case.
That just the one juror wouldn't be enough.
Yeah, I mean, so the argument is that she maybe couldn't be objective enough, but you still got multiple other people there sitting that could still potentially change the outcome of the trial. I think ultimately, here's what I think will happen. I think they'll go back to him and they'll offer him a plea deal, and it'll still be for, forever in prison, basically, but it'll have less,
Well, I don't know if in fact, I've looked into so many cases. I'm not entirely certain that I have the right one in mind. I'm pretty sure I do, though. I believe that he maintained his innocence, even with the key was that the DNA wasn't only found on her body, but it was also found
in the van.
Right. And because of those two things, it was presumed that it had to be the killer, because if she had just hooked up with some guy, like, why was his DNA in the van as well, right? It, like, at her boyfriend's body. But anyway,
he had an interesting approach. Like, this is that case, but his thing. So I watched the sentencing. I want to say that it was 2 years ago. I know I saw it. Like, I saw a video of it when he did it. So here's a quote that I found while we're, like, looking at this. He said that when he was growing up, that he was not a violent person because he had grown up in a violent household. And this is what he says: the level of violence in this crime is something I can't even comprehend. I've gone all my life as a very passive person. I don't ever raise my hands towards anyone, and I've never even got angry. But police interviews with his family, and this comes by way of Canadian broadcast and the Fifth Estate. There was information obtained by the Fifth Estate through access to public record or FOIA requests and public record requests. They painted a different portrait of him. What the family basically says is his youngest sister, Melina Grail, told them that Bill had a lot of anger issues. He had kicked her with his boots on, and at one point she called the police. And her opinion of him was that he felt like life owed him something. There was one incident where they got into a pushing incident in Woodinville, Washington, between William Talbot II and William Talbot I. And William Talbot I was disabled from a motorcycle accident. And the police were called to their homes multiple times when he was young. He apparently threatened to run his father over as soon as he got his driver's license. And this is what his father told the police. He was going to show me that when he was 16, he was going to run me over. So I said, well, then you're not going to get your driver's license, so you can get it yourself. His older sister, or other sister, excuse me, I don't know if she's older or not, Inga Roth told police that she suffered very serious injuries at the hands of William Talbot II. He beat me up, broke my tailbone, and I had to go to the hospital. There were incidents where he broke down doors, smashed holes in walls, so
It sounds like they lived in different worlds.
yeah, they said that he drowned a family pet in the well.
Well, he said he was really passive, and like everybody else was like, no, he's not.
Families can see things
kind of
differently, but Jesus, not that differently.
Well, I was going to say, like, that's just to sum it up, because you have like one person remembering it differently. That's one thing, but like, it sounds like all of his siblings were not remembering him as being a passive person. And what they were saying, everything in the case made sense. The DNA, the guy was never on anybody's radar for the two murders. And the fact that, they found the DNA, and he did have a defense, which was that his DNA got there in a way that didn't make him the murderer, whatever it was.
Right.
And, I didn't buy it. And the fact that, because it seems to me like if what he had said was true, he would have come forward at the time of the crime. Like if he had been hanging out with them or whatever, and he was an innocent
Or he
party.
would have at least ended up on the radar somehow, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot that goes into that, but I have like a lot of confidence. I'm not even sure why the prosecutor wants to appeal the decision to the Supreme Court. I actually do agree that the juror should have been dismissed, and that they should have gotten a different juror that answered the questions in a way that fit both sides. Now, it seems to me like the court would have had a reason for not allowing the juror to be dismissed. Like perhaps they had already used all of their dismissals, or however whatever the rules are. And so I guess it would be up to the court the Supreme Court on appeal to decide like if they were all operating within the bounds of whatever was required. But to me, it just seems like a waste to appeal it again, but perhaps they will. But I have confidence in him getting reconvicted.
This seems very technical to me as far as appeals go. This is a thing that should have been handled.
This is a technicality.
Yeah, it really is a technicality.
I never realized how much I didn't know what that meant.
Until you start seeing cases like this?
Well, until I really started realizing when cases are overturned on a technicality, that means that has nothing to do with guilt or innocence. It's how the lawyers
preserving the process
practice the law, or the judge made decisions. That's what it's being turned over on. It's kind of scary.
So this was one of the first cases I looked at, and they made it really clear in how they covered it so that I could understand what genetic genealogy or familial matches meant. So In 2018, the police put the DNA profile of the unknown killer of Tanya and Jay into a public family tree database. The DNA got a match when with two other people who added their DNA into the database, and they were the killer's cousins from two different branches of his family. Cece Moore, who you send me stuff about her all the time, she researched the family trees and traced the two cousins' families to see where they merged together in a marriage. And that marriage happened between William Earl Talbot the first, or senior, and Patricia Peters. They had 4 children. Among them, there was only one son, and that was William Earl Talbot II. Anyways, this one was pretty interesting overall that this had happened. But this is news for December of 2021. Like, it's just basically happened that.
I was really disappointed when I saw that. And I do feel like the heading of that particular article about it is going to lead a lot of people to think that there was something wrong with the genetic genealogy evidence, and that's just not the case. The evidence was fine. Yeah, I don't even think it was disputed. So
it was just sort of like, yeah, it's mine, but there's a reason. That was the take.
Right. If I recall correctly, in sort of like hindsight, I believe, the prosecutor or somebody maybe it was the lab tech. Like they gave an interview about like if they were nervous about presenting that sort of evidence, and they didn't know like how it was going to be received, because again, this is a situation where you've got the sample that you're making a profile out of the sample. So it's not like they matched it to a person to begin with, right? They took what they had at the scene and they made what the person's DNA would be like. Then they traced it based on publicly available genetic profiles that had connections to it. So a certain number of segments matched it. And so, that's all new. Like it's the concept that I feel like criminals, violent criminals that perhaps left their DNA behind, like they never even fathomed that would be a thing, right?
Right.
They never could have dreamt that, without a direct match, like how do they do it? And then suddenly, forensic genealogy happens and it scares the crap out of everybody that has, committed a violent crime.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think this case could be any more removed from the case we're covering for today if we were to like try and make it more removed. It's geographically removed. The type of crime is removed. This one is a crazy one. Had you ever read about this before, by the way?
No, I'd never heard about it at all.
I had heard of it in a song, but I didn't know what it was. This is like sort of a crazy case. It's a very old case. So this case at this point is 108 years old, or will be 108 years old this Christmas Eve. And how I came across this, I was looking for different Christmas cases to cover this sort of 12 cases of Christmas thing that you had mentioned doing. And with these cases, I am trying to keep them fairly succinct since we're doing 12 of them, so people aren't listening to 50 hours of us talk over the holidays. But I do know that people have a lot of extra time over the holidays, and sometimes they want to listen to true crime podcasts. So I don't really fault them for that. And I wanted them. My thing this year of doing something special is really doing the 12 cases. This one is called the 1913 Massacre. Some people may know it as the Italian Hall disaster. The background on this case is that it was on December 24th of 1913. The people that are involved is the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company, CNH. They were the single largest copper mining company in the area of Northwest Michigan's peninsula. One of the longest strikes in the copper country took place in 1913. It included all of their mines. The Western Federation of Miners had first established a local union in the area 5 years earlier in 1908. But it wasn't until 1913 that they had a large enough local membership to effectively strike. At the time, there were believed to be 15,000 men working in the mines on this peninsula, which is the Keweenaw. I don't know. How do you say that? Keweena.
I think Keweenaw is right. It's the upper peninsula. If you look at Michigan on a map,
Okay.
it's that upper peninsula kind of sticking off.
So 9,000 of the Western Federation of Miners were members of that group of 15,000 people. The membership voted in favor of demanding union recognition from management and asking for a conference with the employers to adjust wages, hours, and working conditions in Michigan's Copper District. The membership also voted to declare a strike if the management refused to grant a conference or concessions. After the vote was held, the WFM sent letters to the mines demanding the conference. The mine managers refused the request, and the strike was called on July 23rd of 1913. The strike was not over until April of 1914. The mines and the miners were still at a standoff on Christmas of 1913. And as of December 24th, that would have made the strike 5 years old. On Christmas Eve, many of the striking miners and their families had gathered for a holiday party that was sponsored by the WFM's Ladies Auxiliary. The party was held on the second floor of Calamit's Italian Hall. There was a steep stairway that was the only path to the second floor. And there was a poorly marked fire escape on one side of the building and ladders down the back side, but you could only reach the ladders in the fire escape by climbing through windows. They've got all of these people attending a party, basically.
Now, I just want to interject here. I'm not sure. Did you end up seeing the picture of the doorway and the fire case that they're talking about right here?
I did. Did you?
Okay. Yes, I did. But what I was going to say is I didn't completely understand what was being said there just from the wording. And so basically, if you can imagine sort of opening doors and there being like a very small foyer, and when I say small, I mean like literally the size of a couple of steps, right? But it's flat. And then basically going straight up a stairwell. Okay. Right. And so I just thought that's kind of important to understand. And I don't know, maybe other people have better imaginations than I do, but I couldn't really picture it based on that. So.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. I mean, I had a little bit of trouble. I saw the picture, but I had a little bit of trouble understanding the events as they happened, which, so you've got between 400 and 500 people in this room. And for some reason, someone yelled fire and there was no fire. However, everyone in the room, or at least a large percentage of the people who are in the room, panicked and they rushed the stairs and they created a stampede. In the ensuing stampede, 73 people get killed. And to date, there's been much debate about who cried fire or why. This is, like I said, I heard this in a song, which was by Woody Guthrie. The line in the song suggests that fire was called out by an anti-union ally of the mine management to disrupt the party and to get everyone out of the building.
Well, actually, I think that the thought was, so the reason I described the stairs is because, so you've got this tiny little foyer and a straight up staircase. And what happened was, as everybody was running down the stairs, they couldn't get the outer doors open. And so it was like they all piled up in that tiny foyer. Yeah. And they couldn't go back up the stairs, nor could they go out the door. And so it was really a horrible thing. And I've read several different they said that somebody, after yelling fire, had actually somehow barricaded the doors so they couldn't be opened. Now, I saw some pictures that led me to believe that there were two sets of doors there, and the first set of doors would have had to have been opened inwards.
Right.
But then I thought I saw where that might have been discredited. But like I said, I saw a picture, so it seemed to me like that's probably what was really there. So basically what would happen is, as everybody got down there and they were packed in that tiny little foyer area, they wouldn't be able to step back enough to open those doors, right?
They would just start stacking against it.
Correct. And there was nothing they could do. So there was one set of doors that opened inwards, and then the outer set of doors that would have opened outwards, but they couldn't get to those doors. But I honestly, when I was reading about it, I felt like it was probably like a prank.
Yeah, I think so too.
And it's so, so sad because I'm pretty sure, or an accident, like somebody thought they saw a fire maybe. Now, there wasn't a fire at all. It was just like I said, a very not well thought out prank or an accident. But because of the looming sort of tension between because all these workers basically had been out of work for 5 months because of the strike. And so I know I read that a lot of the families were sort of depending on the ladies' auxiliary, like in the presents the children were getting. That was like the only present they were going to get that year because their parents hadn't been working because of the strike.
Right.
And so they had all come out to socialize, and they were there. And based on the number of people, it seems like were involved as far as the strike and the mining and all of that. I mean, they didn't really do a whole lot to only take out 73 people. Like,
and 59 of those people were children. I just want to point that out.
And like, I don't buy that anybody in a company would, unless they're part of the mob, I guess, like would use that kind of strategy against like this huge force of like 9,000 members. Like, what did 59 children being killed do, or 73 total, right? It was 59 children and however many 73 minus 59 is adults.
14 adults.
14 adults. And, we're not allowed to do math on the show. There was several accounts of stories that happened. And like, for example, there was a woman who she had her little baby with her and she was with her husband, and she realized she was going to die because of, it happened so fast, but she held her little baby up above her head, and the baby survived, but she was killed just from being crushed, basically.
Yeah, and it was very difficult to even investigate this. I don't know. Have you seen the procession pictures? I think they were
sad.
Yeah, there's so many caskets that are going to be buried. It's very, very sad.
And think about 59 children dying.
Yeah, and so that was just the first factor that made it a very difficult investigation, because you've got 59 children dying, 14 adults. But there have been several investigations after the fact. Excuse me. There were several investigations into this disaster, into the aftermath of this disaster. But they had a lot of witnesses who did not speak English, who were forced to answer questions in English at the coroner's inquest. And because of the way the inquest went, most of the witnesses were not really asked follow-up questions beyond the basics of, were you there? What did you see? Because he couldn't get any answers out of them. And it appears that many of the people who the coroner ended up calling to testify, they hadn't actually seen what had happened. But after 3 days, the coroner, he issued a ruling, but did not give a cause of death. So a subcommittee of the U.S. House of Representatives, they came to investigate the strike in early 1914, and they took sworn testimony there as well. They took testimony from witnesses for a full day on March 7th, 1914. 20 witnesses testified under oath and were offered interpreters. 8 witnesses swore that the man who first raised the cry of fire was wearing a button on his coat for Citizens Alliance. Citizens Alliance, which is an organization that at the time was opposing trade unions and strikes. A common story that you related was the story of the doors opening inward into the foyer. And basically, when the fleeing partygoers reached the bottom of the stairs and pressed against the doors, it prevented them from opening. And that caused most of the people that were smaller and at the forefront of that to be crushed. That accounted for why so many children died. But I did see photos of the doors suggesting that there was a double set of doors and that people were probably not even close to the outside, if that makes sense. It's like they were stuck in the foyer. They weren't even getting into the mudroom, so to speak. There's a book about this. Stephen Leto, he wrote a book called Death's Door, The Truth Behind Michigan's Largest Mass Murder. The coroner's inquest, according to Steve's book, doesn't mention the doors as being a cause of all this. And in the 1914 subcommittee hearing and all of the newspaper articles and stories of this time, they do not mention the doors as being an issue here. That may be an oversight, or it may just be that the vestibule and the landing was not really considered. It may be that people didn't see it because they were pushing the doors open from the outside at the end of all this, and they didn't realize, like, even though they're going into the sea of bodies, they didn't realize it was a factor.
Right. And that's what I was curious about, because like was described earlier, talking about how like the only doors were those doors, and the fire escape was you have to go through windows basically. And so it was just those doors. And so somebody was able to open those doors, right?
Yeah.
After it all calmed down, I guess. But so you're right, they probably didn't even consider it to be a factor, but it seems like, based on sort of what seems like, there could have been a lot of miscommunication happening here. But okay, so the question would be, when they got to the bottom, if the doors didn't open inward, well, what would have stopped the doors from being opened, right? And
Right.
so the answer to that would be that someone had barricaded them, right?
Yeah.
And then they, like, waited 5 minutes and came back by and unbarricaded them?
This is one of those cases where, if you want to believe that it's a conspiracy to shut down part of the strike, pretty much anything is on the table as far as that happening. Like, if you believe that there was a guy there that was essentially on the side of the mines and the mine management and the company and CNH, if there was a representative there who was basically a strike breaker, or like being used as an operative in this, anything is possible. I tend to lean more on the side of, this is a tragedy that happened in the middle of it all. And I really think that you probably don't have a guy. I mean, clearly someone yelling fire in a crowded room, but I don't think that guy is necessarily Citizens Alliance. Although there's a lot of people that believe that happened. Not much is made of it.
Right. And I feel like, I mean, you have to sort of admit it's so tragic, and without it being so tragic, it would almost be stupid, right?
Yeah.
And that makes, stories like these really hard. And I think that the dramatic sort of like giving it something more than just like something stupid that occurred that killed all these kids, like, it makes people feel better.
Yeah, I think it does to some degree.
And so I just have a lot of trouble sort of tracing like how anybody could have even pulled that off if they'd wanted to. And then having pulled it off, like, what did it actually accomplish? Because it doesn't seem like very much. It just took a lot of children away. And that just doesn't, like, what's the point of that?
Well, when I went through reading this, there's still a lot. It's interesting to me when something is this old and it's really not settled in any way. There are a lot of people who believe there were not inward opening doors. And I noticed when I was sort of skimming through the wiki, and some of the, like, NPR has a piece on this. There are several things that you can read where you can read about the Italian Hall disaster. And I noticed that one of the lines in there, I apologize. I don't know exactly where this came from. I think it was from the NPR piece, and it may also be in Wikipedia. But the Italian Hall was demolished in October of 1984. The archway remains, and there is a state historical marker here from 1987. The site is a park that's maintained as a National Historic Park, but the marker incorrectly states that the tragedy was partly caused by inward opening doors. And I bounced through several references to that being an incorrect cause, and I did not. I think they're playing semantics. I think they're saying the coroner didn't say that, so that's not accurate.
Well, the picture that I saw, the only thing I can think of is the picture I saw, unless somebody doctored it for whatever reason, which it didn't look doctored. It looked like an old photograph that was, scanned in. But to me, it looked like the doors at least opened inwards. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't have opened outwards as well, like sort of a door that went both ways. And so with that in mind, I don't know what the case is, but it could be possible that everybody was so panicked and smushed up against the doors that they just couldn't get the doors open, even if they did go outwards.
Yeah, this always makes me think of what I picture is nightclubs. Have you ever seen like the nightclub disasters? There's several of them. There's like several terrible nightclub disasters.
Yeah, that's usually they're fires. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. It's the fires that always make me go, well, that's awful. There's a 1942 fire that is considered to be the deadliest club fire in history. It's called the Coconut Grove Fire. It was in Boston. 500 people died. Well, I think it's like 4 something, but like 500 people ultimately died from that. And whenever I hear something like that, I'm always like, geez, like how could this be prevented? And, we don't hear a lot about that many hundreds of people dying today.
No, right. Well, and, I don't actually go out that much anymore, but I was always keenly aware of, like, when I would go places, I would always know where my closest exit was. And I'm not really sure what that was from, but, I don't know, but I'm sure but my husband played a lot of shows when we were younger. And we were constantly in these like dive bar clubs. And so and I think around that time, and I can't remember exactly, but I believe there was a fire maybe in Rhode Island.
That's the one I was thinking of. That's the station, maybe.
I can't remember exactly.
Great White was playing.
I remember that, it was some pyrotechnics on the stage, I believe, that caused the fire. And so I was always, I don't know when that happened. I'm guessing I was probably 18 or 19 when that happened. And I was just had it on the forefront of my mind because I thought about how horrific it was. And so I always had my eye out on the nearest exit just in case. And I never had anything happen. But it stuck with me that you never want to be somewhere where all of a sudden you can't get out if you want to.
Yeah, this is one of those stories that, like, but for the mystery of it all, it either falls on the side of true crime or it's just disaster.
Right. And actually, the reason I was I didn't mind covering it anyway, but I don't really see it as true crime. However, I do feel like it's worth remembering, of course, the 59 children, but all 73 people who lost their lives during this tragic event. I mean, it really is tragic, and there's nothing wrong with remembering them.
No, not at all. And there was some crime that came out of it. The union president was a guy named Charles Moyer, and he had publicized the accusation that it was a Citizens Alliance member, of someone wearing a Citizens Alliance button who yelled fire, and he refused to retract it. He was part of this relief committee for the WFM. And there was a relief committee that was also made up of the Citizens Alliance members. They collected $25,000 for the aid of the families affected by the disaster. But the families refused to accept the committee's money, saying that the union had promised them aid. The New York Times reported that Alliance members who served on the relief committee learned that Moyer had barred the family, as he was the union president, from taking any of the funds during the strike. So the committee members visited Moyer at his hotel in nearby Hancock, Michigan. They shot and kidnapped him. Then they placed him on a train with instructions to leave Michigan and never return. He went to Chicago, he got medical attention, and he held a press conference where he displayed the gunshot wound and promised to return to Michigan to continue the union work. I thought that was an interesting piece of true crime. He died in June 1929, so it wasn't because of this.
I was going to say, like, I'm not even entirely sure I understand what's happening there. Like,
they've made a conspiracy out of it.
Just all of it, right?
Yeah.
And it really was just a tragedy.
It really is. It is a terrible tragedy, but I think it's a tragedy. I don't think it's as much true crime as it is just a disaster that could have probably been prevented, but wasn't. Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabRottiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabRottiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
First came here, I used to spend a lot of time with Woody Guthrie. Last February. This is one of Woody's songs. I'll sing a couple more. This is one. It's one of a group of two. Take a trip with me in 1913 to Calumet, Michigan, in the copper country. I'll take you to a place called Italian Hall, where the miners are having their big Christmas ball. I'll take you in the door and up a high stair. There's singing and dancing, it's heard everywhere. I'll let you shake hands with the people you see and watch the kids dance around the big Christmas tree. They're singing, dancing, and songs in the air, and the spirit of Christmas is there everywhere. Before you know it, you're friends with us all, and you're dancing around in the hall. You ask about work and you ask about pay. They'll tell you they make less than $1 a day, just working their copper claims, risking their lives. So it's fun to spend Christmas with the children and wives. A little girl sits by the Christmas tree lights to play piano. She gotta keep quiet. Here all this fun you would not realize that the copper boss thug men are milling outside. The copper thugs stuck their heads in the door. One of them yelled and he screamed, "There's a fire." The lady, she hollered, "There's no such a thing. Keep on with your party, there's no such thing." A few people rushed and it's only a few. It's just the scabs and the thugs fooling you. A man grabbed his daughter and he carried her down, but the thugs held the door and they could not get out. And then others followed, 100 or more. But most everybody remained on the floor. The scabs and the thugs, they still laughed at their joke. And the children were smothered on the stairs by the door. Such a terrible sight I never did see. They carried our children back up to their tree. The scabs and the thugs, they still laughed at their spree. Children died at 73. The piano played slow funeral tune, but the town was lit up by a cold Christmas moon. The parents, they weep and the miners,